All right. Hello and welcome back to Real Seekers. I'm your host, Dale, the Real Seeker. And today I have a really special show. It's something that I truly love in terms not only of the guest. We have Dr. Tony Costa. Hey, Tony, how are you?
I'm doing well, Dale. Good to see you in Jerusalem, as always.
As always, my favorite place. So, yeah, in the Holy Land kind of thing. And not only do I have one of my favorite guests of all time, we're covering one of my favorite topics, biblical archaeology. And I know, Tony, you actually teach a class at the University of Toronto
I
on
do.
biblical archaeology, and I've always wanted to audit that. Just for financial reasons, I haven't been able to in the past, but it's a topic that, geez, I love. I'm kind of curious what was it about biblical archaeology that made you want to kind of teach it at the University of Toronto there?
Well, I'm teaching it through the School of Continuing Studies, so you wouldn't have to worry about auditing it because it's basically expanding your knowledge. The students don't have any coursework, so they
Oh,
just come in and sit and learn. And I give them free resources like handouts, ebooks, and so forth. But what I found is that when I used to study in my undergrad, we did some archaeology of the ancient Near East, including Egypt. And so when I got involved in that area, I just fell in love with archaeology. I was fascinated by these ancient artifacts and what they tell us about these ancient people and how they dovetailed with the biblical record and the biblical worldview. And so I just started teaching it. I think about 4 years ago, I started teaching it at the University of Toronto. I proposed it as a course, and uh, tons of people. I mean, this year I'm teaching it again, but last year we had probably over 15 students present. And we go right back to Mesopotamia, the earliest written records in Sumeria. And then we go through Mesopotamia, we go Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome. So we end with the Roman Empire in the first century. But it's always been an area of interest among students.
yeah, definitely. Like I said, it's something that I've always been fascinated in. So, yeah, I think at some point I'm probably going to take that course. If give me the details the next time you're teaching it, especially
Absolutely.
if it's free. Oh, great, I'm there. But yeah, I'm just kind of curious. Have you ever done traveling yourself to any of these areas and stuff?
Yes, yes. I mean, I've been to Greece. I've been to Rome, and so I've gone to some of the archaeological remains. Every time I've wanted to go to Israel for some strange reason, either it just fell through. There was, as you know, it was very turbulent, a lot of wars going on, and so it's never come to fruition. But it's one of the areas that I definitely want to visit, and so yeah, I have seen some of these items. I've actually seen them in the British Museum. I was there last June,
Mhm.
so of 2025, and I was able to see a lot of these artifacts, the actual artifacts. You know, it's been said, Dale, that if you ever want to find artifacts from every part of the world, you just go to the British Museum because everything, the Brits brought everything in there.
Yeah.
And so the Rosetta Stone is there. And when I was there last, I saw Codex Sinaiticus, the first complete copy of the New Testament from 325 AD.
Mhm.
So museums, go and visit museums. I got to see some of the. I'll mention them in my presentation, but some of the items like the Dead Sea Scrolls, a lot of that was in the ROM in Toronto, the Royal Ontario Museum, and also it was in Gatineau, Quebec, at the Canadian History of Ancient Civilization. So a lot of this stuff has been brought into the West, and so it's one of the great things I love about museums is they preserve these ancient items.
100%. Yeah. Well said. And you mentioned the Dead Sea Scrolls, but believe it or not, I was lucky enough to get to see it in Jerusalem at the
Wow.
Israel Museum there.
Okay, the Shrine of the Book.
The shrine. Yep. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. There we see the Great Isaiah scroll
I
just
did.
going right across. Yeah, it's amazing. Amazing.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. So as the fans will get, our topic today is the biblical archaeology, and Tony's going to be giving us kind of a snapshot to open up. He's prepared a presentation,
Mhm.
kind of giving us a snapshot of his course that he teaches and some of the amazing archaeological finds supporting the Bible. So, yeah, if you want, I will bring up your
That's
slides
great.
now. All right.
That's great.
Do you want it
Okay.
to be full screen, Tony, or?
It's whatever you want. It's whatever you're comfortable with. I'm okay either way.
Okay. All right. Cool.
All right. Okay. All right. So let's begin then. So I told Dale before we came on that this is more of a sampling. It's we got about 40 slides or so, but it's a sampling. There's a lot more that could have been included in this presentation. So I just chose some relevant archaeological discoveries that are that speak of the Bible and the ancient Near East and the common worldview that they held. So I'm going to begin talking about the Sumerian king list, which does sit in the British Museum. This is one of the ancient, the oldest list that we have of kings in the ancient Near East. The primary form of government, as far as we go back in human history, is monarchical. So the rule of kings and queens is the oldest form of government that we have in writing. And so the Sumerians wrote in what's called the cuneiform script. They would use wet clay, and then they would use these stylus, like a pen, a wooden pen. And what they would do is they would use wedges. They would put in wedges that would form what we call cuneiform, which is considered the oldest writing in the world. And so it dates to about 3300 BC. So what you have here is a four-sided column, and it's written on four sides, and it records for us the king list of Sumeria, the various cities like Ur and Lagash and all these different areas in the Mesopotamian region, which is South Iraq. If you look at a map, you've got the Euphrates River and the Euphrates and the Tigris. And Mesopotamia literally means between the rivers. So that area is considered to be the cradle of civilization, where civilization began. And also, it's interesting that the Bible places the Garden of Eden in that area as well, because it mentions four rivers in Genesis, and two of them is actually the Euphrates and the Tigris. And so it's believed to be the biblical location of the Garden of Eden. So in the Sumerian king list, it talks about how kingship came down from heaven. And that shows us that in the ancient world, the kings were believed to be sons of the divine gods. And so this idea that the king is the image of the God on the earth, that the king is the lawgiver, and that the king is the son of the gods is an idea that permeates most of the ancient Near East, Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Persia, the Greeks, and so forth, and then later the Roman emperors. And so this idea of the king being the image of God resonates with the biblical view that Adam was made in the image of God to be royalty. Adam and Eve were given dominion over the earth, to subdue it. That is regal language, dominion, rulership. And so in the Sumerian king list, these kings live for astronomical centuries. It talks about one of them rules over 200,000 years. So there's this massive amount of time which these kings are ruling, which indicates their divine status. And then it mentions in the middle of the Sumerian king list, and then it says this, it says, and then the flood came and everyone was swept away. And then it says, and then kingship came down again from heaven. So you actually do have the record of a flood that takes place here. And it speaks of it as a general flood. It's not this idea of a local flood, but that the flood came, it wiped out humanity, and some folks who were faithful and righteous survived it. And then they start up a new civilization. So there's some parallels there to the biblical account of Noah and his family and so forth. Ramesses II, some scholars believe that he was the Pharaoh of the Exodus. And that depends on which view you take. Some hold to the early view of the Exodus, which would be around 1400 BC. Others take the earlier view that it would be around 1250 BC. But regardless of that, this Pharaoh, some believe that he was the Pharaoh of the Exodus. I got to see this statue, by the way, folks, and it's massive. It's in the British Museum as well. And what we know about Ramesses is that we have found him. They've actually found his tomb, and this is his mummy. And so if this is the Pharaoh that was the Pharaoh of the Exodus, then you're looking into the face of the man who saw Moses. If this man could talk right now, and he's very well preserved. The Egyptians invented embalming and mummification, and so because of their embalming process, the bodies of these pharaohs have been incredibly preserved. And to be honest with you, Ramses is much better preserved than Tutankhamun, King Tut. Tutankhamun's mummy is more deteriorated, but Ramses II, and he even has ginger hair. This is what really struck me. He had ginger hair. Now, whether that is due to the decomposition process, I don't know. And his teeth are intact, and so this is a quite an interesting find. So if he is the Pharaoh of the Exodus, the traditional view, then we've actually got his mummy. This is an inscription that dates to about 1400 BC, and what you find there in underneath this figure is what's called a cartouche, and a cartouche indicates that this is the name or a title of this figure. The thing that strikes us about this figure is this is not a typically Egyptian-looking person. He's got a beard, he's got a headband, and this is typically how Semites or Semitic-speaking people would dress. And it's very possible that this may be a Hebrew. And the reason why we say that is because in that cartouche, it mentions the God of the Hebrews, Yahweh. So it actually contains the name of God, YHWH, and it's of course used in hieroglyphs, but it mentions him being the God. He's a God of shepherds, and so this would indicate people who were nomadic and people who took care of livestock. And so the fact that we have an Egyptian inscription that actually bears the name of the God of Israel connects Yahweh with Egypt. And also the fact that the people mentioned in that cartouche, the people of Yahweh, are a agricultural keeping people. They were shepherd type people, which would explain the Semitic lifestyle of keeping livestock and so forth. So this is what made this discovery very prominent, was the fact that it actually names the God of Israel. Another thing that was discovered, the inscription called the Balaam inscription, 9th or 8th century BC. This does not come from the Jews or the Hebrews. This actually comes from it is a Semitic source. It is a Semitic inscription, but they're not Hebrews, although they're Semitic speaking. And this is not from the Bible, but what is interesting about this inscription is it mentions Balaam, son of Beor. And this was found in Deir Allah. And what is striking about this is that Balaam is actually mentioned in the book of Numbers, where he is called by King Balak to curse the Israelites. And if you read the inscription on this, which it has been translated into English, it mentions not only Baal, son of Beor, it mentions him having this dream of what he calls the Elohim, the gods. And what is interesting is when you compare it to the book of Numbers, we're told there that Balaam also had a dream where God basically told him, you're not going to go and curse Israel. You're actually going to go and bless them. And so there's parallels in this inscription with what we see in the book of Numbers, for example, in chapter 23 of Numbers. And so even the name Balaam, son of Beor, is bang on. So what does this tell us? Well, it tells us that this figure mentioned in the Pentateuch, in the book of Numbers, was known outside of the Bible, outside of the Pentateuch, and in such a way that it parallels much of what we know about this man in the Pentateuch. This is probably one of the most interesting discoveries. This is called the Marinepta stele. And a stele is like think of it as a plaque, a very tall plaque. And what you have there at the top is you have the Pharaoh Marinepta. This is from around the 13th century, around 1250 BC. And what you have is it is written in hieroglyphs. And what it does is it is recording the battles of King Mereneptah, the Pharaoh of Egypt. And near the bottom there, around the third line in the bottom right of the stele, it says there in hieroglyphs, it says that I attacked Israel, and the seed of Israel is no more. And what is interesting about this is that it mentions Israel being in the land of Canaan. In other words, the Pharaoh did war with the people of Canaan, and he mentions Israel, and he talks about their seed, their descendants, and he talks about how he has basically wiped them out. Now, what is interesting about this is that, number one, you have the name Israel mentioned in an Egyptian source, and number two, they are in the place where they are said to be in the book of Joshua, when Joshua leads the people into Canaan and he settles the tribes in the land. This stele confirms that there is a people already in the 13th century BC already living in Canaan. They're inhabitants of Canaan. And when he uses this language of wiping them out, this is what we call hyperbolic language. It's propaganda, really. Propaganda is not a new thing. And this is very much like the Bible's language of they utterly devastated the Canaanites, or they destroyed them, or they slaughtered them. And I think, Dale, you may have had Dr. Paul Copan on your show. If not, you should get him. And I see you're nodding, so I think you've had him. Dr. Copan has written a book called "Is God a Moral Monster?" And what he does is he goes into these, the accounts in the Old Testament about Joshua's war with Jericho and Saul's war with the Amalekites and so forth. And what he shows is that the Bible also uses this hyperbolic language of utterly destroying the Canaanites, but it's hyperbolic because the Bible still mentions the existence of Canaanites long after the wars of Israel with these neighboring nations. And so and as Dr. Copan rightfully points out, it's like, if you're a Leaf fan and the Leafs are playing the Montreal Canadiens, and let's say the Leafs win 8-0 against the Canadiens, you'll hear fans say things like, "We annihilated them, we destroyed them, they got creamed, we wiped them out." Well, of course, they didn't wipe them out, they didn't annihilate them as a people, but this is hyperbolic language. It's a victory taunt, it's a victory dance, if you will. And so in this stele, which records the wars of Mereneptah against the enemies of Egypt, it's just significant that he mentions a people already living in Canaan around 1250 BC, which fits the chronological order that we find in the Bible, that the Israelites are already in Canaan at that time. So very, very interesting discovery. This was discovered recently, not too long ago. This is known as ostraca, and ostraca is what we call shards, like of vases, or it could have been, for all we know, a basin, some type of a vessel. And what they found inscribed on this, and this was discovered in Gath, that is, I think it's in the Palestinian territories, but it has written on there the name Goliath of Gath. And so the archaeologists who discovered this thought, well, is this the Goliath mentioned in the Bible that fought with David? Well, I mean, how many people were called Goliath? Was Goliath a common name among the Philistines? We don't really know, but what are the chances we'd find this ostraca with the name Goliath, who actually was from Gath? And so some have surmised that perhaps this could have been some kid who probably thought Goliath was his hero. The way we idolize superheroes, or, we wear T-shirts, at least back when I was a kid, we'd wear T-shirts, Batman, Superman, or we use our old lunch boxes with superhero figures on them. This could have been a kid who may have thought Goliath was his hero, and so he wrote down his name. We don't know. We don't know for sure who owned this. But what we do know is that when it was translated, it actually mentions Goliath, the famed giant we read about in the book of Samuel. So the fact that it mentions Goliath by name indicates that there was at least someone called by that name, that it was a Philistine name. And even the area where it was discovered was one of the central cities of the Philistines. This is one of my favorite. I actually got to see this in Gatineau, Quebec, when it was in the museum of the Canadian Museum of Ancient Civilization. And I apologize that the type is a little off here for some reason. But this is called the King of Israel House of David inscription. It's a basalt stone. And if you look very carefully at it, you will notice that there's some inscriptions on there. And that inscription is actually Semitic. It's called Paleo-Hebrew. It's pictographic. So Hebrew used to be a pictograph script, and that evolved into what you have, the square letters that we see in Hebrew today. Now, what makes this very, very interesting, it was written by an enemy. It was a Moabite king. This inscription was written by a Moabite king, and he talks about doing war against a particular king who belonged to a particular dynasty, a particular house. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you this is what the inscription looks like. And I want you to see here, the first inscription here. So Hebrew, those of you who may have studied Hebrew is always written from right to left. Okay, so you read it from right to left. And I always tell my students, Dale, that if everything was written in Hebrew, there'd be nothing left to write. Get it? Okay. So English and Greek is read from left to right. That's a bit of a dad joke, Dale.
It took me 2 seconds, but I did get it.
Okay. So what you have here, folks, at the top, you have here it says Melech Israel, and then you have Bayit David. So King of Israel, House of David. So what he is saying here, the Moabite king is saying,
just so the fans know, you're talking about the top, the one with the square around it.
Correct. The first one.
Yeah.
The first one. Can you see the mouse there?
No, we're not seeing your mouse.
Okay, that's all right. Let me see if I can do something different here. Can you see it now?
Nope.
Okay, that's all right. So the first rectangle on the top, the first one, it has Melech Israel, which means King of Israel. And what the king is saying here is he did war against the king of Israel who belonged to Beit David, the house of David. So this was discovered around 1996. And at this time, some liberal scholars were doubting the existence of King David. They thought he was probably just as legendary as King Arthur. But when they discovered this, it basically put that whole view to rest, because this is written by an enemy king. It's a Moabite king. This is not a Jewish source. It's Moabite. And he's saying he did war against the king of Israel, who belongs to the house of David, or the dynasty of David. Well, if David never existed, it'd be quite strange to be doing warfare against a king who belonged to the dynasty of David. And so this really revolutionized the way that we look at, again, Old Testament history, specifically the monarchical period with David and then Solomon. So we know from this that there was a dynasty of kings that belonged to the house of David. And this is a technical term that is used in the Old Testament and in the New Testament as well. Here we have this Assyrian tablet. It's about 6 feet tall. And it was also, it was in the British Museum, and you could see it there if you ever go to London. And this is about 850 BC. And what this Assyrian tablet mentions is this Assyrian king doing battle with King Ahab. So who is King Ahab? Well, if you know your Old Testament history, Ahab was the husband of Jezebel. And Ahab had brought apostasy in Israel because his wife Jezebel was a Phoenician, and she ruled the show. I mean, she was the one in charge. And if you remember, Ahab was the king who opposed Elijah, the prophet Elijah, in 1 Kings 17 and following. And if you remember, Elijah was the prophet that was responsible to bring Israel back from the worship of Baal or Baal and bring them back to the worship of Yahweh. And Ahab was that king. Now we know he's historical because this tablet is Assyrian. It comes from the Assyrian Empire, and it's very much like the Mereneptah Stele. It's speaking of the victory of the Assyrian king against his enemies, including King Ahab. So we can look at this and say, yes, King Ahab, who is described as the king of Israel, King Ahab actually existed. He was a real figure mentioned in the Bible, but he's also externally attested here in this tablet. This was also discovered recently. This is the first mention of Bethlehem outside the Bible. It's a 7th century artifact that has the words Beth Lechem. And Beth Lechem, Beth means house, Lechem means bread. So Bethlehem is the house of bread. It's also the ancestral city of David, where he was born. And of course, as Christians, Bethlehem is the birthplace of Jesus as well. And so the Bible spoke of Bethlehem, but this is the first time they've found something outside the Bible that actually mentions the city by name as a historical city. Now, I mentioned King Ahab, and he's mentioned in the Assyrian tablet. We actually have his wife's seal. So in the ancient world, when kings and queens would authorize documents, they would put a seal on them. They'd put some hot wax, and then they would put the impression of the seal on those. We still use them today. So when you earn your degree, a bachelor's, master's, or a PhD, you'll always notice there is the seal of the university on it. And seals to this day, court orders have seals on them, the seal of the court. So these seals were what authorized documents or what made them legal. And what is significant about this is that it is written in hieroglyphs, which was very common. And so if you read the hieroglyphs here, they speak of Jezebel, the queen. And notice the cartouche again; it's within that circular bubble there. And so Jezebel, who is the queen who again brought apostasy to Israel, but also sought the life of Elijah. She was irate with him when he had 450 of her priests killed at Mount Carmel, where you have that great challenge, the competition between God and Baal, and which God will answer by fire and so forth. We also have images of Baal, who I just mentioned. Baal was the Canaanite god of thunder. He is the Canaanite counterpart of the Norse god Thor, which you probably know from your Marvel comics or Marvel movies. And Baal was a god who was not only he was a very attractive deity because he was the god of the rain. And if you live in an agricultural land where you depend on crops for your survival and you have livestock, rain is absolutely essential. You cannot have crops without water. And so he was very attractive in the sense that they believed that if you worshiped him and invoked him, then he would bring the rain. And what you see there in that image is on his left hand, that's actually a lightning bolt that he's holding. And very much like Zeus in the Greek religion, Zeus also had the thunderbolt in his hand. And you know he's a deity because if you look at the helmet he's wearing, Mesopotamian gods and Canaanite gods always had these horned helmets. So all these divine figures are always displayed as having these helmets with these horns on them, displaying power. These are signs of power. And if you look under his feet, you'll notice this wavy line there, and that represents the waters. that represents the waters. And of course, being the god of thunder, the god of agriculture, he is the one who he's the one who brings rain. And if you look at the Bible where it talks about Elijah's ministry, you will notice there that there's a polemic there. There's this pushback where Elijah comes on the scene and Israel's worshiping this god Baal. And Elijah says, you will have no rain for 3 years. And everyone goes, well, why would Elijah say that? Well, because Elijah is countenancing Baal. He's trying to say there that Yahweh is the true God. It's Yahweh who brings the rain. It's Yahweh who blesses his people with bountiful resources. And so by causing the rain to stop for 3 years and bringing about a drought and a famine, what Elijah is trying to show is that Baal has nothing on Yahweh. In other words, his jurisdiction, his domain, the rain and the storm and so forth, Elijah is saying, it's not Baal that runs the show here. It's Yahweh. And he's going to show that by bringing a drought into the land where you're not going to have rain. And so there you have this polemic, this pushback against the worship of Baal. Now, this signet ring or this seal, it's a little fuzzy there. What you have there is, this is very interesting. You have the name of Jeroboam, who was the first king of the northern kingdom of Israel. Now this is important, folks, because in 922 BC, there was a rupture in the kingdom, in the Davidic kingdom. There was a rupture, and 10 of the tribes separated and went north, and 2 of the tribes stayed south, and that became the kingdom of Judah. So at some point in Israel's history, you had the kingdom of Israel to the north. The capital of the kingdom of Israel was Samaria, the capital city. The kingdom to the south was known as Judah, and its capital was Jerusalem. Jeroboam was the first king that was chosen to rule the northern tribe of the 10 tribes, the northern tribe of Israel. And he built a rival temple there to the temple in Jerusalem. In other words, he rivaled the southern kingdom. They rejected the Davidic king, and they chose their own king. And his name was Jeroboam. And that's what you find there in the inscription. At the bottom there, you have the name Jeroboam written in Paleo-Hebrew. And notice the lion. The lion is the symbol of monarchy. It's the symbol of the king. Just like today, the United Kingdom, its animal is a lion. And so this shows the regal status of Jeroboam. And this is the first time we actually see something outside the Bible that bears that name as the king of the northern tribes. So very, very interesting find. And it's an exquisite, beautiful seal for the time that it was written.
Can I just
please go ahead.
Just a clarifying question. Sorry to interrupt.
No problem.
But with the so I noticed. How do we know he's associating Jeroboam with the northern kingdom? Because if it's just based on the lion, like there's the Lion of Judah as well.
Yes, that's correct. That's correct. So remember, this is a rival king. So he's rivaling the Davidic king. We know he's the king of the north because of the biblical texts. The biblical texts tell us that. But it's the exact same name, and so he's a king from the rival kingdom to the north.
Okay. All right. Cool. Thanks so much.
No problem. So this one here is also one of my favorites. I actually saw this in London. This is known as it's actually from a black obelisk. It's a beautiful obelisk, and it shows tribute being given to the Assyrian king. And what the person that you see who is bending down and bowing there, I've always told people that, the Smurfs have been around for a long time. And that is actually King Jehu, who is a king of Judah. And what he's doing there is he's paying tribute to the Assyrian king. The Assyrian king is on the left there. He is holding something like a saucer in his hand. And Jehu is bowing and doing homage to the Assyrian king. We know this because not only does the Bible mention King Jehu, it mentions that he paid tribute to the Assyrian king. They would do that to basically it's like a tax system. It's a protection money tax system so that they don't take you over, they don't invade you, and so they would pay tribute to the king as a vassal kingdom. So they recognize the Assyrian king's supremacy, but they function as a vassal kingdom of Assyria. And the Bible recounts this. It recounts this event here of Jehu paying tribute to the king. And notice how small he is in comparison. So if Jehu was to get up, he'd probably be half the size of the king. But this is typical of royal images. It's another form of propaganda that the king is head and shoulders above the rest. And you'll also notice in the middle there, you have an Egyptian appropriation. That sun disk there comes from Egypt, but the Assyrians appropriated that, and it represents the sun god Shamash. And to the right of that symbol, you have the star of Ishtar. She was known as Inanna among the Mesopotamians. She was known as Ishtar to the Assyrians. And when the Romans get hold of her, she's known as Venus. The Greeks called her Aphrodite, and she was the god of love and war and eroticism and so on. So what it's basically showing here is that not only is the Syrian king connected to the sun god Shamash, he is the son of the god, but it's showing the supremacy of Assyrian religion over Jewish religion. And this is how they did it. It's types of propaganda images like this. The Assyrians were brutal people. I mean, there's many records of how savage they were. They were like, if you think of Count Dracula from Transylvania, the original Vladimir Dracula, he would take the Turks and he would basically impale them on spikes to strike fear into his enemies. Well, the Assyrians did that too. They impaled people on spikes. They decapitated their heads and formed these pyramids as warnings to others who try to mess with Assyria. So now you know why Jonah did not want to go to Nineveh. He definitely didn't want to go to them. He hated them. He knew of their savage history. And so Jonah did not want to see God show mercy at all to Assyria. But anyway, here you have the King Jehu. Another beautiful item that they discovered, folks, was this was found at the tomb of King Uzziah. And King Uzziah was the Davidic king who reigned during the time of the ministry of Isaiah. This is 8th century BC. And what it says there is there's a warning there. This was placed at his tomb. And it basically says there's a warning there that this contains the bones of Uzziah. And so the second line there, you have the word on the second line down to the left, there's the Hebrew name Uzziah. And then the third line down, it says Melech Yehuda, the king of Judah. And then it says Velo, in other words, do not open, do not disturb. So it's a warning here that you're not to disturb the remains of King Uzziah. We know he died of leprosy, according to the Bible. But the fact that we have the tombstone, if you will, of King Uzziah validates his existence. I mean, he was a real king in Judah, and it was during his death, according to Isaiah chapter 6. It's at the time of his death that Isaiah received this vision of the Lord recorded for us in Isaiah chapter 6. If you're ever in Jerusalem, you may have heard of Hezekiah's tunnel. And what you have here basically is an aqueduct. The water is still flowing through that tunnel today. It's still flowing there. Now, why is this interesting? Because when Hezekiah was king in Judah, the Assyrians, led by King Sennacherib, had come down to Hezekiah decided not to pay tribute to the Assyrian king. and they came and they surrounded Jerusalem, and they were going to invade Jerusalem. They're going to take it over. Before this happened, though, Hezekiah was very smart. He drew water into the city from the Gihon spring outside the walls of Jerusalem, and he covered the spring with a massive boulder so that the Assyrians wouldn't find it. So what they would do in the ancient world is to force the city into surrender, they would cut the water source, because without water, you're done, you're finished. You're gonna die of thirst. You can't survive without water. So they would cut off water supplies to the city. They would surround the city, prevent anything from coming in. They would basically starve them out. But what Hezekiah did was he drew a line from the Gihon spring. He brought an aqueduct into Jerusalem to save them from a potential Assyrian invasion. And he did. He did save the city, and he credits God for that, of course. But that water is still running. And when the Assyrians surrounded the city, we are told that, according to the Bible, it says that an angel of the Lord struck the troops of Assyria. We do have an account. We're going to see the actual Assyrian account of that, and they admit that something happened that caused them to retreat and go back to Assyria. We'll get to that in a minute. But this is Hezekiah's tunnel, constructed by the king to draw water into the city of Jerusalem in case of an invasion. We also have another seal that was discovered, was the seal of King Ahaz. This king was, again, he was the king that succeeded Uzziah, and he was king during the time of Isaiah. It was to this king that Isaiah made the promise from God, which we hear at Christmas all the time. Isaiah came to King Ahaz and told him that the Lord himself will give you a sign. A virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and you shall call his name Emmanuel. And so that statement was made to this king by the prophet Isaiah. And so we know of King Ahaz from this inscription here. We also have the seal of King Hezekiah. We just talked about him creating that aqueduct that came into water into Jerusalem. And here you have in hieroglyphs and Hebrew, you have the scarab there, the Egyptian scarab, and underneath you have the name of King Hezekiah. Again, a very real person in real time, in real history. This impression here was discovered, I think, about 8 years ago in Jerusalem in an archaeological dig. And it's called a bulla, which is a seal impression. And it reads, belonging to Isaiah the prophet. And the second line there, under the crack, you see the name Yeshayahu, which is Isaiah in Hebrew. And at the bottom, it says Navi. And Navi or Nabi means prophet in Hebrew. And this is the first time they've found something outside of the Bible that actually mentions Isaiah by name and identifies him as a prophet. So what are the chances that this is some other person? Well, probably slim to none, because the only person we know in Jerusalem that had the name Isaiah was the prophet. And this seal impression mentions both his name and his title.
And so
Yes,
it dates to the time of Isaiah, or when did that seal date?
this is 8th century, 8th century BC.
Cool.
Yeah. Another interesting find, and this is also in the British Museum, is this inscription that mentions Belshazzar. Now, Belshazzar appears in the book of Daniel, chapter 5. He's the guy who saw the writing on the wall, the finger writing on the wall. And what is interesting about this find is that before the discovery of this inscription, liberal scholars said that Belshazzar was made up, that he never existed. He was created by the writer of the book of Daniel. And they also accused Daniel of calling him a king. So the first thing we need to realize is that this inscription from Babylon mentions Belshazzar by name. And it also says that he was vice regent, that is, he was in the place of his father, who was obviously the king of Babylon. And while his father was away, his father spent most of his time away from Babylon. And while his father was away, it says that Belshazzar was the vice regent. He was the king in place of his father. And so the book of Daniel was not only correct in calling him Belshazzar, but it was also correct in calling him king because he was functioning. He was the crown prince, but since his father was away, he was acting as king in his stead. He's not just mentioned here, but you also have mention of in this cylinder, you also have mention of Belshazzar, and it also mentions him as acting as king. So this is a huge discovery because there's been no book from the Old Testament that has been more attacked other than the Pentateuch. The book that's been the most attacked is the book of Daniel. And even the dating of Daniel, was it written in the 7th century BC, or was it the 2nd century BC in the time of the Maccabees? And so there's a lot of debate over Daniel. A lot of it has to do with predictive prophecy, and depending on your worldview, if you think prophecy doesn't happen because there is no God, you're going to give it a very late date and saying, well, it came after the fact, or it's just a made up story. But if Daniel actually goes back to the 7th century BC, which I believe it does, and many other conservative scholars believe it does, then this explains the accuracy of what Daniel tells us about Belshazzar and how he was ruling as king in place of his father, in the absence of his father. So all that nicely lines up with what we have in our book of Daniel in the Bible. And here is Sennacherib's prism, also in the British Museum. The beautiful thing about this prism, it's not that big. It's actually, it's probably six inches tall. I don't know. I mean, these people must have used magnifying glasses because to read this, yeah. And it's a hexagonal prism, 6 sides. And what it mentions here is the invasion of Jerusalem. It actually mentions not only did Sennacherib go with his armies to besiege Jerusalem, it actually mentions Hezekiah by name. And it says, the king says, I had Hezekiah like a bird in a cage. In other words, he was trapped. But something happened. The troops had to retreat. It says that there was some other war attack that was coming on Assyria against Nineveh, and they had to depart. Another account says that they were struck with a plague of some sort. Some even think it was, for some reason, venereal disease. We don't know why. But the fact of the matter is, it mentions them surrounding Jerusalem. It mentions King Hezekiah being trapped like a bird in a cage. And then it talks about the withdrawal. They abandoned they aborted mission. They abandoned the invasion of Jerusalem. So again, this is from this is an Assyrian source. It doesn't come from the Jews, but it mentions it confirms the besieging of Jerusalem. And it also mentions King Hezekiah as the king of Judah. So again, it just dovetails very nicely. And then, you wanted to add something, Dale?
Yeah, let me just ask you. I'm not sure if you're aware, but I think I heard something when you mentioned the invasion of Sennacherib there. I think there was just a recent finding also confirming that same event in 2024. So, are you familiar? Apparently, there was a paper published in the Journal of Near Eastern Archaeology by Stephen Compton, where he actually located the Assyrian siege camps at Lachish and Jerusalem, dating to 711.
I remember something of that, but I have not had the chance to read his paper. But thank you for letting me know about that. I'm going to follow up on that.
Awesome. All right.
Yeah,
Cool.
thank you for sharing that. Yeah. Okay, and now we also have Cyrus. Why is Cyrus so important? Well, Cyrus it was the benevolent king of Persia, and Cyrus in Hebrew his name's Koresh. Cyrus is actually mentioned by name in Isaiah 45 verse 1, and in Isaiah 45 verse 1, Cyrus is also called God's Messiah. He calls him my anointed, and God says that he's going to use Cyrus to bring his people back from exile in Babylon, which he did. And in fact, in this cylinder, Cyrus is recording here. He's considered the first statesman. He believes in the freedom of religion, the freedom of speech. He believes that everyone should have the right to practice their religion without intimidation. And here he says that he released the captives that Babylon had brought. He released the captives. He returned them back to their cities. And here's where it gets interesting. It says, Cyrus said, I returned them back to their cities to build the house of their God. And also, he said, all the idols or the statues that the Babylonians had taken as trophies, he said he returned all the gods back to their original places. And so he comes across as a benevolent humanitarian, a philanthropist, and this ties in to what the Bible says about him, that he actually liberated the Jews from exile, gave them permission to return, to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem, and he talks about how he believes that all people should have the freedom to practice their faith. And so this is why Cyrus has been called Cyrus the Great. He was a celebrated king in the ancient world. And so in this cylinder, you have the account of him releasing these captives, not just the Jews, but other captives that the Babylonians held, and gave them the right of return, if you will, the right of return to go back to their motherland and to restore their religious practices, which would include, of course, rebuilding the temple. And of course, Augustus Caesar, we're now into the New Testament period. Go ahead.
Just one follow-up. Sorry, I hope I'm not wasting too much.
No, you're not. You're not.
I'm just kind of curious. So I know that Cyrus the Great, he's actually, I think, one of the first, if not the only one in the Old Testament, a pagan or a Gentile to be called a Messiah.
Correct. That's correct.
And I'm just kind of wondering, like, how does that make sense? That might confuse some Christians because, well, isn't the Messiah has to be Jewish? How could you be
right
a Gentile the Messiah?
Right. That's a good question. So the answer to that is that the word Messiah, the anointed one, in Judaism, refers to a prophet, a priest, or a king. So kings are anointed into their office, prophets and priests. And so what Isaiah is doing is he is using a term of endearment, the Messiah, and he's using that to indicate that Cyrus, even though he was a Gentile, he was used of God in such a way that he was a Messiah figure, much like the Davidic king was, or the high priest, or a prophet like Isaiah. So it's a term that is it's a lofty title that Cyrus is being given. It's like receiving the Order of Canada. He is receiving this honorary title that is usually given to Jewish priests and prophets and kings. But remember as well, Dale, that we also have Melchizedek in Genesis 14. He meets with Abraham after he rescued his nephew Lot. And Melchizedek is not a Hebrew. Abraham didn't even have any kids. Ishmael was not even born. Isaac was not even born. So Melchizedek is this strange figure who appears. His name Melchizedek means king of righteousness. He's also called the king of Salem. He's also high priest of the Most High God. And so this is a title that Messiah is a title that shows that this person, Cyrus, is being treated by Yahweh as if he was one of his own people, like one of the members of Israel. So he's the only one, and you're absolutely correct. He's the only one, but it indicates that Cyrus will do God's bidding. He will fulfill God's promise to bring his people back, and he is giving that honorific title that he is my Messiah. And in fact, the Hebrew says, my Messiah, Cyrus, my anointed one. So it's not a title that has to necessarily be only tied to the Jews, but it is an unusual title that is given to a Gentile king because of the grandeur of what God is going to do through him.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much for explaining that. I appreciate
Of
it.
course, of course. Okay, so let's say a little bit about Augustus Caesar. We know about him. There's a lot of stuff on him. When I was in Greece last May of the year before, in May, I got a chance to go to the Acropolis where you had the famed Temple of Athena. And outside of that temple, there was a little altar there that was dedicated to Caesar Augustus. And it's interesting because, I mean, it's written in Greek, and I was able to read it and translate it. And in there, it speaks about that this altar has been dedicated to the great Augustus Caesar, and it calls him the savior of the world. And that's interesting, Dale, because that was one of his titles, savior. And in Luke chapter 2, where Jesus is born, the angels declare to the shepherds that the one born in the city of David is a savior that has been born to you, who is Christ the Lord. Now, if you look at those titles like savior, that was a title of Augustus. And then words like the Lord, the kurios, is the title of Augustus. And then, of course, you have the word Christ, which means anointed one, used of kings. So in Luke's gospel, what happens is you have this anti-imperial language that the child that is born in Bethlehem is the real savior of the world, not Caesar, not Augustus. He's the true king, not Augustus, and he's the true Lord. And so Caesar Augustus was known as the peacemaker. He made peace, but through war, he basically quashed any rebellion against Rome. But he was an emperor that was invested in peace in the kingdom. And he is significant because he's actually mentioned in the New Testament by name in Luke's Gospel, chapter 2, where it mentions the decree that went forth from Caesar Augustus, and which brought the Holy Family into Bethlehem, where Jesus would be born, and thereby fulfilling the prophecy of the Messiah's birth in Bethlehem. So we know he was a peacemaker, according to the records. We know that he had the titles of Savior and the Anointed King, the Emperor, etc. And the fact that the New Testament writers were very keenly aware of him, and so much to the point that Luke himself records his rulership during the time of Jesus' birth. Now, during the ministry of Jesus, 30 years and forward, Tiberius Caesar was in charge. Did you want to add something, Dale?
Well, okay, so it's kind of going outside of mainstream history here, but we did have an audience member, Viking Lord, who's kind of saying, when you talk about Augustus, this is a total red herring because before that temple was there was an altar to Pan. And he's saying Julius Caesar basically faked his death. So Augustus was never the emperor. He was just a puppet emperor. So I know that's it. I don't know what kind of conspiracy theory he has, but do you know about that or where that comes from?
Well, there, as you know, Elvis Presley is still alive, right? He didn't really die. And Bruce Lee is still alive. And these the conspiracy theories are nothing new, but Julius Caesar, according to the standard historical record, was assassinated by the Senate in 44 BC. Around this time, actually, in March, beware the Ides of March.
Yep.
And so around this time, he was assassinated. Augustus Caesar was his adopted son. He was not his biological son. He was adopted by Julius, and by Roman law, an adopted son has full rights as much as a biological son. And so the altar to Pan, I think the questioner is confused with Caesar Philippi, which is in the north of Galilee, where Jesus asked the interesting question, "Who do men say that I am?" There was an altar to Pan, definitely. But I'm talking about Athens. When I was in Athens, this altar to Augustus Caesar was there behind the temple to Athena. It's there. I mean, you can search it. I even did a video recording of it and on my YouTube channel. So that was, you're looking there at the first century, and there was warfare between Caesar Augustus and Mark Antony. You probably know Mark Antony with his amorous affair with Cleopatra. And Mark Antony was trying to usurp the throne. Augustus Caesar basically sent out his navy against Mark Antony and killed him, and their son. Mark Antony and Cleopatra had a son. I don't know if you're going to like this one, Dale. His name was Caesarion.
Oh,
And it actually means Little Caesar. So if you've ever been to Little Caesar's Pizza, you'll know what I'm talking about. But anyway, I don't know of any serious historian who denies the death of Julius Caesar and the rise of Augustus Caesar. I don't know of anyone who denies that.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, I was just curious if you knew even of conspiracy theories, like where he might be getting his ideas from. But yeah, fair enough.
Yeah.
I'll let you move on. So.
All right. So Tiberius Caesar, of course, he takes over after Caesar Augustus, and we hear a lot about him in the Gospels. Even the Sea of Galilee, in the book of John, chapter 21, the Sea of Galilee is called the Sea of Tiberias. And this was very common. Herod and his family, his sons, they knew where their bread was buttered, and so they always try to smooch with the emperor. I mentioned Caesarea Philippi. It was named after Tiberius, and Philip was one of the sons of Herod the Great. So Tiberius was the type of emperor who, much like Caesar Augustus, he didn't like revolutions, obviously. And what we know about Tiberius from Josephus and other writers, particularly Josephus, the Jewish writer, Tiberius Caesar put Pontius Pilate under probation. And if you ever notice, Dale, in the trial of Jesus, particularly with Pilate, you'll notice that Pilate is trying to let Jesus off. He's trying to let him go. And a lot of folks think that Pilate was being a friend to Jesus. They were friends and something like that. When in actual fact, the reason why he wanted to let Jesus go is because he hated the Jewish leadership. He didn't want to give in to their demands. We know this from Josephus, that Pilate hated the Jews. He brought Roman standards into the temple that had images of the emperor and so forth. Well, what happened was the Sanhedrin started writing to Tiberius Caesar saying, "Hey, your boy Pontius Pilate is causing a lot of issues here. He disrespects our religion." So what Tiberius did was he put him under probation and basically said, "One more and we're going to exile you. One more strike, we're done with you." And so in the Gospel of John, you have this very interesting statement made by the Jewish leaders. When Pilate is about to let Jesus go, they say to him, "If you let this man go, you are not a friend of Caesar." And that title, friend of Caesar, was an honorary title that people received. It's like being knighted, and you're called Sir John or Sir Paul, whatever. And so that explains why Pilate was very nervous at the trial of Jesus. It wasn't because he loved Jesus. It was, he knew he was under probation, and he did not want to cross the religious leaders. And that is why, if you notice, he gave in to their demands by handing him over to be crucified. Now, what we know about Tiberius, and I'm sorry the coin's a little hazy here, but we do have coins of Tiberius. His image is there on the left. That is a profile there of Tiberius Caesar. On the right, you have the goddess Roma sitting on the throne there. And if you remember in the Gospels, when Jesus was asked, "Is it right to give taxes to Caesar or not?" If you remember, what Jesus did was he asked to see a coin. He said, "Well, bring me a coin." And he said to them, "Well, whose image is on it? An inscription." And they said, "Caesar's." And he said, "Well, then render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and render unto God what is God's." And so this was probably the coin that, I'm not saying this is the actual coin that Jesus touched, but it would have been a coin something like this, where you have the image of the emperor on it, you have the inscription. Jews were not allowed to place images on their coins, their shekels, but this was a Roman coin that they would be using in the empire. And so when we read about this account of the coin being brought to Jesus, and Jesus pointing out the image, whose image is on it, Caesar, and the inscription, and then he goes on to say, well, you render to Caesar what, give Caesar his due, and give God his due. In other words, it's not one or the other; it's both. Here's a very interesting discovery. This was discovered in the north, in the Galilee, and I believe this was 1996 or 1995. This was a capstone of a pillar that they found in the north. And if you look very carefully, it's written in Latin. You'll notice the name Tiberium on the very top. And then at the bottom, you could see the name Pilatus. And before it, you have the ending of what's Pontus Pilatus. And what is interesting is this was a capstone that was actually dedicated by Pilate to the Emperor Tiberius. So notice he's trying to play very nice with the emperor. He's trying to be very careful. And so here you have the name of not only the emperor that ruled during the time of Jesus's earthly ministry and then his death, you also have the name of the governor who was in charge of Jerusalem during the Passover, because the Passover period was a time of, there was a messianic fervor at that time, the idea of liberation, the Exodus. And so the Roman armies would come in mass to Jerusalem, and Pilate was there. The reason why he's there in Jerusalem during the Passover is to maintain order and to quash any attempts at revolution. So here you not only have the emperor's name, Tiberius, but you have the name of Pontius Pilate as well. They also discovered at the Herodium this ring. And on this ring, there's some question about whether this is Pontius Pilate's ring, because the inscription in Greek sounds like Pilate in Greek. It was found in the Herodium, which was a special area that Herod would entertain dignitaries and so forth. So the question is, was this a ring that was given as a gift by Pilate, or was it perhaps, he was probably having a great time. He was probably drunk, and perhaps he took his ring off and it fell. We don't know, but some speculate that this ring could have been a gift from the Herods to Pilate. We're not sure, but if you look on the second image there, you can see the name Pilota, and so some have guessed that perhaps this could be Pilate's ring. We know that Pilate spent a lot of time at the Herodium. We know he spent time with Herod Antipas, so it's not surprising that perhaps he left his ring behind, as sometimes happens. The destruction of Jerusalem AD 70 was commemorated on this Roman coin. On the right side, you will notice the Latin Judea capta, meaning Judea is captured. You see a woman there that is weeping and wailing. She's a personification of Jerusalem. And you have a man there on the left side that seems to have his hands tied by the palm tree. And on the left, you can see the name Vespasian, the Emperor Vespasian, who had sent in this fellow here. He sent in, sorry, I thought I had that image. He sent in Titus, the general, to destroy the city of Jerusalem in AD 70. One of the greatest cataclysms, the second destruction of the temple, the first being by the Babylonians in 586 BC. And this one, of course, the second temple destroyed by the Romans. But here you have the commemoration of that event that the Romans published in their coinage. Here it's a little difficult to read, folks, but here you have the name of the proconsul Gallio. And why is this interesting? Because this inscription actually bears the name of a person mentioned in the book of Acts, chapter 18. It only appeared in the book of Acts. Before this inscription was found, some critics even said Luke made him up. Luke made up the name of this fellow. Well, they've actually found an inscription in Greek there. If you see it very carefully there, it says Gallio. If you know Greek, you'll be able to see the first letter there is the gamma, the G, and the last one is the omega, the long O, Gallio. And if you notice the Greek here, it's written in its typical fashion. It's called scripto continua, and there's no spaces in between. It's all written in capitals, called uncials. And so here we have a name that appears only in the book of Acts, but here it is attested outside the book of Acts as a real governor or proconsul. And Nero, of course, Nero is not, he is probably implied in the New Testament. Some think that Nero may be the beast of Revelation 13, the one who kills the martyrs and the servants of God, and who fornicates with the kings of the world, and so forth and so on. So as far as Nero is concerned, we know that he was probably the emperor that had Paul and Peter martyred, because according to the church tradition, we're now outside the Bible, but according to some of the fathers of the church, it was Nero who ordered the execution of both Paul and Peter around the year 64, 65 AD. Yeah, go ahead, Dale.
Yeah, I just want to follow up because I've heard from, there's an echo. I've heard from some scholars that, you know, the number of the beast in Revelation traditionally is 666. And I've heard some scholars say that, well, in some manuscripts, it's actually 616. And if that's true, that corresponds to Nero. Is there any truth to that at all? Or?
Yeah. So most of the manuscripts have 666. There is one manuscript that says 616, and Dr. Daniel Wallace says that 666 is the number of the beast and 616 is the neighbor of the beast. So what you have is Irenaeus around 140 AD. The church father Irenaeus commented on this. He says he knows of another reading that has 616, but the majority view that the church held to was the 666. Now, you do get Nero's name as 666 if you write it out. If you write Nero out in Hebrew, you get 666. And others have said, no, it refers to Caligula. Well, here's the thing, Dale. Whatever the number is, it's indicating the number of the gematria, the value of the letters of the name of an emperor of some sort, the Roman emperor for sure. And so what you find with 616 is someone trying to mention another emperor. In other words, he thinks that this is the emperor, and then he's working on the value of that emperor's name. So we only have one manuscript that says 616, but the multiplicity, the majority of the manuscripts of the book Revelation all have 666. So they are attempts. There's actually one very, very late manuscript that says 665. And so what this indicates is that Christians throughout history have been trying to figure out who exactly is that emperor. I mean, even today, you have people who think the book Revelation is still future. It's still going to happen. Like the dispensationalists believe Revelation 5 to the end is going to happen after the rapture of the church, which I don't hold to. I don't think you hold to either. And so the number of the beast traditionally has been held to be Nero. And they've tried to do it in Hebrew. They've tried to do it in Latin. And so let's just say that it continues. There's a lot of interest in exactly which emperor that was. But what we do know is whichever emperor it was, this would have been an emperor that brought about, some even thought it was Domitian, but he's a little too late after the book Revelation. So whoever that figure is would have been a figure that was guilty of martyring Christians in a par excellence, like one of the worst emperors of all. So that's why they think Nero, because Nero, if you read about Nero, he wasn't, let's just say he wasn't altogether there. He burned Rome. He caused the burning of Rome, and then he blamed it on the Christians. And then there's a myth, a legend called Nero Redivivus, where they think that Nero, according to the standard historical record, he committed suicide. But others were speculating that he actually faked his death. So notice that these conspiracy theories are very old. Some say he faked his death and that he ran off to the Parthian kingdom, which would be Iran, and that he was planning to come and attack Rome. And so there's this idea that Nero was really not dead, that he was faking his death, and in so doing, he was trying to do a parody of the death and resurrection of Jesus. Because in Book Revelation, it mentions one of the heads of the beast was had a mortal wound on it, but then it came back to life. And so some commentators think that that's referring to the Nero redivivus idea.
That's fascinating. Yeah, yeah. So I guess just Elvis wasn't the first one to have done.
No,
come
and
back,
he's not going to be the last.
Yeah.
Yeah, and of course we know that we also know that Jeffrey Epstein did not kill himself. That he's hiding somewhere. Yeah.
Nothing new under the sun.
Nothing new. Nothing new.
All right. Awesome.
All
Yeah.
right. Okay. And of course, Titus, he was the general that led the armies to destroy Jerusalem. When I was in Rome several years ago, if you ever go to Rome, right across the Colosseum, you have the Arch of Titus there. And as you go through that arch and you look up to the left, you see this beautiful carving. And what you see here is the procession of the Romans with the furniture of the temple. And this is the earliest depiction of the menorah, the seven branch candlestick. And you notice that this is a procession into Rome. You see the Roman standard on the back, and they would do this. They would go into these victory processions. Like it's like when the Toronto Raptors win the cup. What do? They have procession through the city of Toronto with all the players waving at everybody. So this is a procession where they would take these trophies, these war trophies, and they would take them to Rome and put them in the temple of Jupiter or some god, crediting that god with giving them victory. So the destruction of Jerusalem it's not a myth of history. It's even celebrated in the Arch of Titus as one of his achievements. And the fact that we see just the menorah there, and it's just incredible. The fact they're carrying it on their shoulders gives you an idea of this was a large candlestick. This is not some little thing. But this is the earliest depiction we have of the Roman procession of the temple furniture. Caiaphas, the high priest, the ossuary of Caiaphas. They discovered this beautiful ossuary. When Jewish people died, they would bury them in tombs. When the flesh decomposed and they were just bone fragments and remains, what they would do is they'd put the bones and place them in an ossuary. It was like a bone coffin, if you will. And they did this in the first century. Very common practice among the Jews because the bones were sacred and because of the belief in the resurrection. They discovered the ossuary here and written on the side there, you have the name Caiaphas, the high priest. And I believe he's called Caiaphas there, the son of Joseph. And if you look at the ossuary, this is no regular ossuary. It's beautiful. You look at the design on the side, the ornaments there. This tells you that this person is very wealthy, that this is a very wealthy person whose bones were placed in there. And when they translated the inscription of whose bones these were, these scholars were absolutely flabbergasted that these are the remains of the priest that put Jesus under trial in the Sanhedrin and put him under oath. If these bones could talk, I mean, it'd just be incredible. The remains of the man who is notorious for not only putting Jesus under oath, but tearing his robes and declaring that he's committed blasphemy. And so very, very interesting find, confirming he's not only mentioned in the New Testament, Josephus also mentions Caiaphas. And then here on the right, I want you to look at the right side there. And I'm sure, Dale, you've seen this because of your your studies and your expertise in the shroud. If you look at the right side, in 1969, they discovered in a tomb in Jerusalem, in a family tomb, by the way, they found the remains, some bone remains. A particular interest was this ankle bone here with a nail through it. And we know the name of this fellow. His name was Yohanan ben Heikel, John, the son of Heikel. And we even know his profession. He was actually a baker. And to be crucified, he must have done something very naughty. Probably may have been part of a zealot group, zealots or revolutionaries. But what we do know from this is that in 1969, there was some critics saying that the Romans did not use nails when they crucified their victims. They were arguing that they simply bound them to the cross and let them die of asphyxiation. But when they discovered the heel bone of this poor fellow, they noticed there was a nail stuck in his ankle bone, and it's curved at the end. There's also the remains of some olive wood there that would have functioned as a washer of sorts. They were not able to remove this nail because it was bent in, and they buried him with the nail still stuck in his ankle. And on the left, you have a plaster Paris recreation of that nail there in the ankle bone of this person. So what this tells us is that his ossuary dates to the 1st century when the Romans were in power, and it also confirms that the Romans did in fact use nails to crucify victims, and of course bringing much more agony upon them by piercing their wrists and their ankles. So very, very interesting find. And you want to add something to that, Dale?
Yeah, just very quickly. I don't know if you know this or not, Tony, but a couple of years ago on Secrets of the Dead, a PBS special, apparently they found a second crucifixion victim in Britain.
Yes.
Now that dates to the 2nd century, and it's Britain, but
yes, I know that, and that is one image that I do need to add to my files. Yes, I did read about that. So yes, there is a second one. You're absolutely correct. Absolutely correct.
Yeah, just confirming again that
yes,
people that say, "Oh, the crucifixion victims were thrown in a common pit," totally not true. So
yeah, and the fact that this poor gentleman was found in a family tomb, it confirms that in some cases the Romans would release victims, crucified victims, to their family, especially if you had connections. Like in the Gospels, Joseph of Arimathea had an audience with Pontius Pilate, and he was begging Pilate for the body of Jesus, and Pilate released it to him after Jesus was confirmed to be truly dead. He released the body to Joseph. So that shows that in some cases, even Josephus tells us, in some cases they would allow the body to be given to the family to give them a proper burial. So that seemed to be the case with this person, Yohanan, as well. This 1st century fishing boat was discovered in Galilee, in the Sea of Galilee, and it was discovered at the bottom. They brought it up, and they said that this boat is actually 1st century. It goes back to the 1st century, to the time of Jesus, and we know fishing was a huge industry in that area. Peter, John, and James, we know and Andrew were fishermen by trade. And many believe that, and they also found in this boat, I don't know if you know this, Dale, but they actually found a little area, like a little cubbyhole there, where someone could slip under there and take a snooze. And that is very interesting because we're told in the Gospels, Mark 6, for example, that when they were out in the Sea of Galilee, there was a storm, and Jesus was asleep in the boat, and so that there would have been a little area there where they could snugly just go in there and take a nap. So
I'll just say I didn't know that. So that's actually really cool. Yeah.
It's very cool. Yeah. And they found the location on this little boat here. I wouldn't say it's a little boat, but it's a boat that could probably carry, I don't know, 6 or 8 people. Could it be one of the boats that Jesus rode? We don't know, but it does date to his time. and it shows that fisheries, the practice of fisheries was it was central to the diet of the people up in the Galilee. Artemis of Ephesus, we know about this goddess in the book of Acts, chapter 19, when Paul was in Ephesus with Silas. They caused quite a ruckus because they were preaching the gospel there, and the people there were devotees of Artemis. She was known as Diana by the Romans. They called her Diana. And Artemis was a fertility goddess. You could see the statue of Artemis. She has what looks like, they look like breasts, but probably fruits. And you've got animals on her going down into the legs area. You've got a number of livestock, and those were probably deer that were flanking beside her. Those were deers. And so she was worshipped as the mother of life, of agriculture. And in the book of Acts, when Paul's preaching the gospel, and it's causing the people to move away from buying all the little trinkets that they would sell about this goddess, there's a riot that occurs, and they start crying out, "Great is Artemis of the Ephesians! Great is Artemis of the." They ended up having to grab Paul and put him in prison because they're about to. They're just the crowds were about to kill him and his missionary friends. But we do know about Artemis. She was prominent. Her worship was prominent in Ephesus, which is in modern day Turkey. So again, it does comport with what we see in the New Testament. Machaerus, a fortress that was owned by the Herods. This area here, according to Josephus, Dale, this is the place where Herod Antipas would have his great parties. He would have all the dignitaries come to this event. And this is where also Josephus tells us that John the Baptist was imprisoned here. There was prison cells in this area. And if you remember in the story of Herod having this big feast for his dignitaries and friends and so forth, you'll remember at this event that he got all drunk, etc. And the daughter of Herodias that he seemed to have sexual attraction and sexual fantasies towards, he wanted her to dance for her and offered her half of his kingdom. And where would this have taken place? Well, it would have taken place here in Machaerus. And there were prison cells there underneath the palaces. And that is where John the Baptist, or John the Baptizer, would have been imprisoned. And it's only Josephus who tells us the name of the daughter of Herodias. The Gospels don't disclose her name. The name of her daughter, according to Josephus, is Salome. He's the one who tells us the name of the daughter. And if you remember, she does this dance, and at the end, she said, "You promised me half of your kingdom." He said, "Yes." And she said, "Well," he said, what is your request? What do you desire?" And her response was, "I want the head of the head of the Baptist. I want him dead because he criticized Herod's marriage to his brother's wife, Herodias." And that would have taken place here. This would have been the place of John's martyrdom, where he would have been executed. So again, New Testament doesn't mention this place by name, but Josephus does. And Josephus describes it as the place where John was imprisoned. And there's no reason to doubt Josephus on that.
I'm just curious. It's hard to tell from the picture, but see on the left-hand side there, it looks like that's kind of going down in elevation. Are those perhaps like the prison cells? Oh, that's
it could be. It could be. And as you can see, it's on a higher elevation there. But remember, I mean, the Herods were very wealthy. They not only owned this, but there was also the Herodium as well. And so, you may be right that may have been where the prisons were. Yes, but this would be the location of John's martyrdom.
Awesome.
Okay, I think this will be the last one. This is a silver amulet from the 7th century BC, and what is significant about this? It's silver. But the reason why this is a very interesting amulet is because written in Paleo Hebrew, you have the Aaronic benediction from Numbers chapter 6, I believe 22 to 24, where it says, may Yahweh bless you and keep you. May Yahweh cause his face to shine upon you, and may Yahweh turn his face to you and be gracious to you. And so why is this interesting? Well, it's interesting because that blessing was probably used by some as an amulet against evil, against demonic forces. And it was a wristband. It was actually worn on the wrist. Just like today, if you notice, a lot of folks wear rubber bands with "What would Jesus do?" and so forth. But it's a very interesting discovery, because for the purposes of Old Testament textual criticism, they argue that the Torah, or the Pentateuch, was finally redacted after the exile in the 500s BC. But this amulet goes to the 7th century. And in other words, it comes before the exiles return to the land, which means that the reading of the Torah, the reading of the book of Numbers, the Aaronic benediction, was already accepted. And that would mean that they would have had to have at least the Torah, or at least the Pentateuch, already written in order for them to be using these various quotations from this text known as the Pentateuch, the 5 books of Moses. So it does raise, and some scholars have raised this as a very interesting counter against the claim that the Pentateuch was not redacted until the 500s BC, when this actually goes to the 600 BCs. In other words, before the supposed redaction. And here you have someone quoting from the Pentateuch, which would imply at least that the Pentateuch would have at least been written already. But anyway, that's just a text critical issue.
So you're basically saying out with the documentary hypothesis just from this one finding alone.
Yes, that's correct. So the documentary hypothesis, if anyone's wondering what that is, it's the view made, well, a lot of German scholars like Julius Wellhausen, he wasn't the only one, but they had argued that the Pentateuch was not written by Moses, that there was actually a number of editors. They sometimes are called JEDP. There was one editor that used the divine name Yahweh or Jehovah. E stands for the Elohist. So they would say Genesis 1 was written by the Elohist editor, because God is referred to by Elohim there. And then you have the priestly editor, where you got all the sacrifices and the rituals. And then you got the D stands for the Deuteronomist, which would mean this is the guy who kind of brought everything together. He tried to basically take all of these editors and compile it into one volume, if you will, of the 5 books of Moses. So yeah, I remember when I was studying Hebrew, Dale, at the University of Toronto, one of my professors, when I brought up the JDP documentary hypothesis, he actually told me, this was in the 1990s. He said that theory is on its way out in academia. So yeah.
And for that matter, even the new documentary hypothesis is now cliche and
yes,
and stuff as well. But
that's right.
One thing, just to clarify on this, so I'm not sure. You mentioned that this is written in Paleo Hebrew, and so I don't know, I guess, the development of the Hebrew language, but I thought that by the 7th century BC they had Hebrew at that stage. So, like, can you give a snapshot of what is the development of the Hebrew?
Yeah. So at this time, you still have what's called Paleo Hebrew. It's pictographic, and so the writing resembles pictures. And then where it changes, Dale, is when they go into exile in Babylon and they come into contact with Aramaic. And what they do is they adopt the square script that was used by the Aramaic speaking people, sometimes called Arameans. And that's what they use today. It looks like calligraphy. They're you can put them into little boxes. They're like called box script. That they got when they returned from the exile. And the return from exile, you're looking at 515 BC. And so they brought that writing skill with them. And that has remained to this day. And I was just going to see if I had if I had my Hebrew Bible here, and I was just going to illustrate that to you, but yeah, I don't think I have it here in ready access. But you know what I'm talking about, the modern day form of Hebrew that we see.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Okay, yeah, that's fascinating. Yeah, because I didn't know it was that late before we got into
Yes,
the modern Hebrew. So okay, all right,
yes,
great.
yes.
Yeah,
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 so we're done with that. That's the presentation.
awesome, awesome. Well, I have a lot of I've been writing down notes furiously, but yeah, I'll just try to highlight maybe five or six or something like that to go over. I think we just have one that'll last from the audience, but
Sure.
great. Now let's start in order. Let's go with the Old Testament, and I guess my first place to start is let's start with the Exodus because that's a very controversial
Yeah.
area among scholars. And if I heard you correctly, I think you go for the Ramses II as the pharaoh of the
Y-
Exodus.
Yeah, I don't. I To be honest with you, I don't know. Some think it was another pharaoh.
Yeah.
And I'm saying Ramses because that was. I mean, even Cecil DeMille's The Ten Commandments. You have Yul Brynner playing Ramses. I don't know. I'll be honest with you. Ramses, the Exodus, Book of Exodus, never says what the name of the pharaoh was. It mentions Ramesses, but it refers to it as a location, as a place. So the Book of Exodus itself does not mention the name of the pharaoh. But I would take the view. I'm still not convinced. I'm more convinced of the older view that the Exodus took place around probably 1400 BC.
Mhm, mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah. Believe it or not, I'm in the same boat as you. I prefer that. I think I had David Falk on my show, and I do
yes,
think there are some good counters. So I
sure,
don't want to be dogmatic, but
sure.
I guess let me ask you this then, because one thing I asked David Falk is there aren't just two views. There are certain radical skeptics who, believe it or not, the 1400s is just the middle date. They'll say no, the Exodus dates back to the time of the Hyksos in
Mm,
1700 BC,
right.
and I don't know if you've heard of this
Yeah.
kind of radical theory, but why why can we rule that out? Like, why do most scholars not even consider that a plausible option?
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure, but I mean, in the Bible, it doesn't really mention these sea invaders, like the Hyksos. See in archaeology, Dale, you've got two camps. You've got the maximalists and the minimalists. So the maximalists are those guys that are more conservative. They tend to believe the Bible is a good source of history. The minimalists, the Bible is just another piece of literature. So they don't hold to it as some divine revelation. And so a lot of these minimalists will look for various theories, and one of them is the Hyksos in the 1700s BC. And so, but then again, their view is, well, the Bible's just another theory among others. That's all it is. But I've not found that view overly convincing myself. I still think the 1400 BC date, in my opinion, I think it serves as a better date for the Exodus.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's just it's totally inconsistent with the biblical data and even a secular chronology from Egypt's record.
Yeah,
The only reason they go for it, from what I see, is an anti-supernatural bias. So, oh,
exactly.
there was an eruption over
Yeah.
in Greece, and somehow that led to the 10 plagues and all that stuff. So, yeah, it's just
Yeah,
not.
I even heard people say, well, Moses was on some type of a hallucinogenic drug or something when he thought the tree was on fire. And and this, if you listen to them, they're not really denying it. They're just trying to find naturalistic explanations.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Okay, all right. So, getting into King David, I was very fascinated with this period. Appian Media has a great documentary on covering the time of Saul, David, and Solomon, and that sort of thing. But there are certain skeptics and archaeologists like Israel Finkelstein, and they'll say, "Well, great, you maybe you've proven there was a king named David. I'll grant you that, but he's nothing like the King David in the Bible because the chronology, when we look at some of the cities mentioned for David and we carbon 14 them, date them, they don't date back to the time of David. They're later on and stuff like that. So What would you say if a skeptic kind of said, "Well, carbon 14 disproves all of your Bible and stuff like that," even if I grant David?
Yeah, in the Moabite inscription there, it's not it's obviously referring to a king who is of the house of David, descended from the house of David. But I know Finkelstein is more. He's more. His specialty is Mesopotamia. It's cuneiform writings, Mesopotamia. But in terms of the dates for David, I'm not. To be honest with you, Dale, I have not researched his papers on that. Um, I mean, David is usually dated about 1000 BC. He conquers Jebus and makes it his capital of Jerusalem. Um, but I would have to, in all honesty, to give a proper answer, I'd have to look up what Finkelstein has written on that.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Yeah, no worries. No worries. And yeah, his findings are very controversial. I'll just say.
Yes, they are. They are.
Okay. Now, there was one thing I wanted to ask you. So again, this is a radical skeptic kind of thing. So this will be the last thing from the Old Testament that I asked. Are you aware of Francesca Stravina Lacapu? Um, okay, she's friends with Richard Dawkins. She
Okay.
is an Old Testament scholar, but again, on the radical minimalist end. And she kind of mentions a common objection that, well, we have tons of archaeological evidence that the Bible is wrong. You know, the Jews were never monotheists. They always believed in God who had a wife, Asherah, right? It's even mentioned in the Bible. So uh, they'll say the Jews were never monotheists. They were at best henotheists and stuff. Is this true? Is there archaeological evidence that God had a wife? And how should we make sense of that?
Yeah. So there is an inscription that has a figure that looks like a bull, and it says Yahweh and his Asherah. Now that confirms actually what the Bible says. It doesn't, in my opinion, it's actually a wonderful testament to the reliability of the Old Testament, because if you read the prophets and the historical books like First and Second Chronicles, the constant problem that Israel was having was they were always attracted to this fertility goddess Asherah. And some of the kings, like Manasseh, for example, they placed the Asherah poles in the temple, and these were supposed to be sexual objects, an Asherah pole. So what they were doing is by putting these Asherah poles in the temple of Yahweh, they were basically trying to get Yahweh to marry, if you will, Asherah, and they believed that this would bring fertility and this would bring crops and the livestock, et cetera, et cetera. So Israel's constant temptation was going after these other gods and appropriating the Asherah worship because of its fertility connotations, because it brought fertility. So that's what the prophets are railing against. So if you read Jeremiah, for example, or even Ezekiel, that's what they're railing against. And they're not saying that Yahweh is happy with this. They're saying that you have broken the covenant, that you are married to Yahweh. You are the wife of Yahweh. Israel is his wife, not Asherah. And you have violated the covenant of marriage with Yahweh. You're committing adultery with these other gods by worshiping them. So in my archaeology course, I also show these little, they found them in Judea from the 8th century. You have these fertility idols where you've got these women with very large breasts and thighs. And again, those are fertility idols. We read about them in the Bible as far back as Jacob. Even Rachel was hiding her father's gods. Laban, who was the father of Rachel, she stole his household gods. And it says there in Genesis that she placed them on the saddle of the camel and she sat on them. Well, why would she be sitting on these fertility idols? Well, because she was barren. She couldn't conceive. And so the Bible is very honest about the paganism that the people of Israel kept being attracted to. It never denies that. So when she says that, the Bible shows that the God of Israel had a wife, well, that's what happened in apostate Israel. No doubt about that. The prophets keep reminding them that God is the God who gave the commands at Sinai, that he is not to be worshipped with any other gods. And in terms of monotheism and henotheism, There is only one true God, according to the Old Testament. The other gods that are mentioned there they're not denied as gods, but they're said to be gods that are worshipped by the nations, but they're actually nefarious demonic entities. In other words, what the Old Testament does is it uses the word Elohim, and Mike Heiser wrote quite a bit on this. The word Elohim can also refer to angels. It can also refer to the spirits of the dead. So when Samuel is invoked by the witch of Endor, she says, "I see Elohim coming up from the earth." This is referring to the spirits of the dead. It could also refer to the one God, Yahweh. So when these nations are said to worship these gods, it's very clear that these entities are a spiritual class of heavenly beings, but they are not Yahweh. They're not uncreated. They're not sovereign, and they are relegated to being idols. They're actually demonic entities. So henotheism says there's a lot of gods, but we're only going to choose one of them. But to the Israelites, there is no God but the Lord our God. In Isaiah, there is no God but me. So there's very clear affirmations that Yahweh is God. And then it says in Psalm 115, but the gods of the nations, they're idols. And they cannot help you. They cannot hear. They cannot see. They're dumb. And they're also demonic entities as well. So I would say that they were monotheistic. They have this view of evolution, that the Israelites went from polytheists to henotheists, and then by the time you get to Isaiah, and then they'll say, well, it was second Isaiah, Deutero-Isaiah, then they become real monotheists. But I don't see that. These other gods that are mentioned in the Bible are clearly defined as nefarious beings that are being worshipped by pagan societies.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, that's one of the major things. I mean, just read the Bible. There are all these times of apostasy where, yes, they were engaged in paganism and worshiping pagan gods. So this is confirmation. So I like your answer there. So, okay. No, I lied. There is one last Old Testament area that I think is important. I'd like to get your take on, and it's the conquests of Joshua and stuff like that. So there obviously are a lot of archaeological evidence for these conquests, and modern scholars like Bryant Wood and the Association for Biblical Research and Scott Stripling and stuff like that. They've tried looking for evidence, and they found evidence of destruction of certain cities attributed to Joshua. But as you know, the secular scholars will come in. There's this dispute with people like Kathleen Kenyon, and they'll say, well, no, you guys have got the dating totally wrong. So I'm just kind of curious, like, what's your take on this, on the dispute between these archaeologists, and how do we reconcile to figure out who's right? Is there evidence for the conquest or not?
Yeah, it all depends on the Exodus, because the conquest, it's with Joshua and so forth. So I think Bryant Wood, I would lean towards his view on it, and it all has to do with dating. It all has to do when the Exodus occurred. So if you're going to take the traditional 1400 BC, then you're going to lean towards Wood's position. Whereas you mentioned, is it Kathleen?
Yeah, Kathleen Kenyon's kind of
Kenyon's view would be based on the later Exodus. So the remains of Jericho. I mean, there's evidence to show that the walls came crashing down. There's no doubt about that. There's also remains that have been found in Jericho of baby bones, fragments of baby bones that have been charred as well. And so this would indicate that when the Bible talks about them sacrificing their children in the fire to Moloch, these finds seem to confirm that these are charred baby remains. And my friend Dr. Clay Jones has written a very fine article on the sin of the Canaanites, and he goes into great detail about what went on in there, and the debase, the immoral acts, bestiality, incest, and so forth, which again seems to comport with what the Bible says about the abominable practices of these nations. So, I mean, my view, Dale, is I think I'm more towards. I think Dr. Wood's view is much more compatible, in my opinion.
I'm just very quick follow up because it was all over the news. Remember, Dr. Scott Stripling? There was this Mount Ebal finding, and it just seems to have gone away. Like, do you know what's happened with that? Like, it was really exciting at the time, but
Yeah, it's still under review. I think Dr. Falk doesn't think much of it. The other scholar that I met with, he's written a book on the world's oldest alphabet, and for some reason his name is escaping me. I've had him on my channel a couple of times. He thinks that it's real. He thinks you're referring to the curses of Mount Ebal,
yeah,
and if you look at some of the Paleo Hebrew inscriptions on there, it does mention the name Yahweh and the word curse. So may Yahweh curse you if you do this, 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 this. So I think there's a good chance of it being authentic and real. And I mean, it is an authentic artifact, but they're still trying to unravel it because it's very, very let's just say it's in a stage that it can fall apart. They're trying to unroll it very carefully, but what they've found so far is I think yes, Dr. Petrovic, I believe his name is, that I interviewed. He thinks it's authentic. Yeah. And that is the mountain. I mean, if you read the Torah, it does talk about the curses that were given on Mount Ebal.
awesome. Yeah, well, okay, so that's great. So I'm still hopeful then to see because it kind of lost steam a bit. Okay, all right, cool. So let's shift focus to the New Testament and look at some of the archaeology there. So in terms of some questions, so I just wanted to first of all ask you. You mentioned an ossuary of Caiaphas. Now, some skeptics, some people have mentioned James ossuary. And so I wanted to get your take on that. Do we have James, the brother of the Lord's ossuary? And what about the Telpiot tomb that James Tabor talks about?
Yeah, the James ossuary. I mean, Ben Witherington thinks it's authentic, but the idea, the Israeli archaeological, the groups in Israel that study archaeology as well, they've concluded that it's fraudulent, and I think they're right. I got to see it when it came to Toronto to the Royal Ontario Museum. I don't know if you remember, it was 2002, and it actually cracked on the way to Toronto. So they were blaming the handlers at the Royal Ontario Museum. And I told my students at the time, they thought that they were thinking, is this the real thing? And I said, well, let's wait until the jury makes its decision. The jury's still out with it on me. And I thought, and if something's too good to be true, sometimes it's too good to be true. And what are the chances you would get, James, the brother of Jesus, son of Joseph? Well, guess what they found? Well, they found that when archaeologists discover things, there's peer review is very, very important. And when this thing was discovered, it was a gentleman who said he had it in his home all this time, and then he brought it forward. And this stuff, this garners like millions of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars if it's authentic. Well, what they did was in Israel, the archaeologists, when you look at these ancient artifacts like ossuaries, there's this thin layer that develops around these things called patina, and it's like, think of it as like a wax layer, and over time it grows around the artifact. And what they found was that patina was penetrated, it was cracked through to write the name James, the son of Joseph, brother of Jesus. And that to me was a clear giveaway that it was a fraud. If it was authentic, the inscription would be under the patina. It would be undisturbed. But the fact that it was cut through the patina suggests to me that somebody wrote it to sell it off. Much like the Wife of Jesus manuscript that Karen King thought was authentic, and until paleographers said no, it's actually a fraud, and they found that it copied from the Gospel of Thomas, or someone was copying from the Gospel of Thomas. But yeah, I don't think it was. I don't believe that the James ossuary is authentic at all.
And anything about the Talpiot tomb you wanted to add, or
I don't know too much about it. I know that the Naked Archaeologist, I think, was really big on that as well, Jacobovich. And to be honest with you, Dale, I didn't find their arguments convincing at all. Not at all.
Yeah, and just as a point of fact, all the scholars that they interviewed for that documentary, that it was a big thing about 20 years ago, I guess 2005.
Yeah, that's right.
Every one of them came and did a documentary refuting and saying we were taken out of context. We don't believe in this. So
yeah,
it's not credible. So
not at all.
Well, I'm kind of curious on a couple of other archaeological artifacts. So, number one, what's your take on the Church of the Holy Sepulchre? Because a lot of scholars, even Protestants, think that it's authentic. And also, I've heard in a documentary that it's possible we've discovered Jesus's house from Nazareth, I believe. So, what's your take on those two things?
Yeah, I think there's good. I think there's a good argument that could be made for the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. I think even William Craig believes it's authentic. I can't see why not. I mean, this massive church was built over it, but then again, a lot of churches. You've got the churches of Saint John the Baptist in places in Israel that they thought he was martyred, where we just discussed Machaerus. So they said that not far from the supposed tomb under the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, there was a garden nearby. They discussed it as a topographically a place where there was a garden, and then there's this thing about the garden tomb. From what I have seen, I would say that there's a good possibility that the tomb of Jesus. I mean, I can't imagine that Christians over time would simply forget where his tomb was. I mean, it's the very foundation of the Christian faith is the resurrection, and so I think that tradition that was the Holy Sepulchre. I think it's quite early, very early, and so I would say probably 80 to 85%. I think it would probably be the actual location. Yeah.
And have you heard anything about the possibility that we found Jesus' actual home in Nazareth, where he grew up?
I've not heard of that one. I mean, I've heard of Peter's house being discovered in Capernaum. But about the house of Jesus, no, that's something I gotta look up on.
Fair enough. Fair. And to be fair, it was just a CNN documentary, so you're not the most
right.
Okay. So I guess I'll ask the audience question. That again, it's coming from our good buddy Viking Lloyd. So again, not mainstream history here, but he's claiming that Jesus was a son of Herod the Great.
Yeah.
Is there any truth to something like that?
No. I mean, the Jews in the Talmud, they try to argue that Jesus was the son of Bandera, a Roman soldier that either raped Mary or Mary had an adulterous affair with. So, no, I mean, there's no evidence to suggest that at all. Herod the Great was not. He was actually, according to Josephus, he was an Edomite. He was not even a full Jew. So, and from the early sources, even the Talmud admits Jesus was Jewish. So when enemies tell you that, no, he was the son of Mary, but it was probably this amorous affair, but they would say he was definitely Jewish. Even by modern rabbinic standards, being born of a Jewish mother makes you Jewish. So I would doubt that very, very highly.
Yeah, I guess to kind of steelman him and twist it a bit. Let me ask the question this way, because some people have said, well, look, Jesus was far more connected than most people typically think. He wasn't just this poor peasant. I mean, Zechariah, the father of John the Baptist, I mean, he's going into the temple and stuff. So his brother is a rabbi and is known as a rabbi and stuff like that. So, or is there any kind of connection to the upper elites between Jesus' family, or what's your take on that?
No, I don't think so, because I mean his family lived in Nazareth, which was a very poor village and very insignificant. It's so insignificant that the Talmud never mentions Nazareth in its geography of the land. And it really was like it was like a backwater little town. And again, that does not, I mean, if and Mary and Elizabeth were relatives, the wife of Zechariah, but if she was, I mean, if they were made of money, all the rich folks lived in Judea. They were down in the south. I mean, even the apostles, of all the 12 apostles, the only one that was from Judea was Judas Iscariot. The other 11 were from Galilee. And so when Jesus speaks about the birds of the air have nests and the foxes have holes, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. I mean, I think it's quite clear that it speaks of his lowly background, and even the Apostle Paul makes reference to he who was rich became poor for your sake, so that through his poverty you may become rich to God. So I think there's a very strong base. And even when Mary went to the temple and dedicated Jesus 40 days after his birth, she offered up the offering of the poor, which was 2 turtle doves. They're supposed to offer a lamb, but there was provision made in the Torah that if the person was poor, that they could offer up 2 turtle doves in the place of the lamb. So I think the New Testament evidence is pretty clear that Jesus was of lowly means, and his family too.
Awesome. All right, cool. So last question of the night, I promise. And it, you know me, it's going to be related to the shroud.
Yeah.
And so I'm actually pretty friendly with the skeptic James Tabor, and he lays claim to say, well, look, I'm the only one who's archaeologically discovered the only known first-century burial shroud. That's the Al Qadama tomb finding, and it's nothing like the Shroud of Turin. So therefore, he concludes the shroud must be a fake and that sort of thing. I'm just kind of curious, what's your take on the burial shroud or fragments that he found, and is he correct to conclude therefore the shroud can't be authentic?
Well, I mean, I would say that I think he's being. Let me see. I'm not saying he's being arrogant, but I think he's just easily dismissing all the research that has gone into the shroud. I mean, not just historians, but even in your fine presentation on the shroud, you mentioned even physicists and other scientists who are looking at this. And I just think he's making a hasty generalization by saying what he did. And he has not responded. I mean, the evidence that has been put out there on the shroud, I mean, convincing even Protestant scholars like Gary Habermas and others. I think some scholars tend to be overly skeptic. The hyper-skeptic is the term I'd like to use. I don't think he's seriously looked at the overwhelming research that has gone into the shroud and the evidence that has been published by people who are, as you've noted, Dale, they're not even Christians, and they're saying this is not a hoax. This is something that cannot be naturally explained, and so I would get Tabor to watch your videos.
Yeah, I've been trying, trust me, but you're absolutely right. You hit the nail on the head. It's the fallacy of hasty generalization. Because we found one sample and it's different than the shroud, that doesn't mean every single other shroud was like that.
Of course not.
Yeah. So awesome. Well, yeah, that I think covers it for all my questions and the audience questions. I just want to say thank you so much for coming on.
Pleasure.
Yeah, I hope you had fun on your end there.
Thank you so much, Dale. It was always a pleasure being with you, and I just treasure and relish just my memories of you when you came to Toronto Baptist Seminary. Still remember you're a young man, and you had just so many questions, and just to see what the Lord has done in your life and how you've grown. And I was so honored to baptize you as well, and just to see how much you've grown and the impact that you're making in the field of apologetics. And so I just pray the Lord continue to use you. And you got some very important stuff there, and you're contributing tremendously to the gospel and the furtherance of God's kingdom.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I always say it really means a lot to me, because I look up to people like you guys, you and Gary Habermas and stuff. the work you guys do is tremendous. So yeah, I hope in my lifetime to at least measure up to maybe a quarter of what you guys have done for the Lord, and
Yeah,
then I'll be happy.
I think you've done a lot, brother. You've done a lot, and
Awesome.
your work is never in vain in the Lord.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Awesome. Well, yeah, thank you so much. I see Mr. Bonnie saying good stuff, guys. He loved
yeah,
the presentation, and Ringo
great,
Cat is saying many thanks to us. So, yeah,
wonderful.
with that said, that's it for tonight. And yeah, just so you guys know, the next show that I have coming on, I think will be on Saturday with Professor Tavos and Abri, and he's going to be debating Phil Bear because, as the audience will know, he's very interested in Jesus. He sees that there's something special about Jesus. He's just not ready to commit to Bible believing Christianity yet. So we're going to be kind of letting him, what's preventing you from taking that step and committing to Jesus? And Phil's going to be trying to help answer that, and hopefully we can get him to cross the line. So tune out on Saturday for that, guys.
All right, that's awesome. Well, Dale, I do have to run, but
Yep.
it was great, and let's do it again.
Sounds good. All
All
right.
right.
Take care,
God
everybody.
bless. God bless everybody. Bye bye.
God bless.